For those joining the webinar now, we are just waiting for the room to fill up. There's quite a lot of attendees today, so we'll start in maybe a minute or so. Okay, so by my clock, that is now 11 a.m. Paris time. So hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Henry Pearson. I work in the OECD's Directorate for Education and Skills. Today's topic is school improvement. How do we implement policies that make schools the absolute best centers for learning and student development that they can possibly be? But more specifically today, we're going to be looking at Norway's experience in this area. For a bit of context, in 2017, Norway introduced measures aimed at giving municipalities and schools more freedom over how they make improvements at their level. It's known as the new competence development model, and the OECD has been very privileged to be involved in supporting its implementation in Norway. We're going to put some links in the chat box to the reports that we've written on this, so you can have a look at those in your own time. But I'm not going to give too much away right now because we have some fantastic speakers who are going to tell us a bit more about all of this. So joining me today, I'm very pleased to introduce Hege Nielsen, who is Director of the Norwegian Directorate for Education and Training. Andreas Schleicher is the OECD Director for Education and Skills. On the line as well, we also have the team that worked on the report from the OECD side. We have Beatrice Pont, Senior Analyst here at the OECD, Pierre Guedard, Claire Shrewbridge as well, also worked on the report, and our analysts in the Directorate for Education and Skills. And finally, we have Ann-Berit Kavli, who is also part of the Directorate for Education and Training in Norway. So what's going to happen in this webinar? Well, Andreas is going to present the main findings of the OECD's report on the competence development model. And then Hege is going to give us more details about the model itself, how it was implemented in Norway and what the impact was. And then at the end, we'll have some questions from you, from the audience. So when it comes time for that, please put your questions in the chat and I will be reading them out to our panelists to answer. Before we go ahead, Beatrice, I think you wanted to say a few words.
Yes. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. It's a pleasure to introduce this webinar, which is actually a new series focused on the rubrics of leading education change. And the objective of this webinar series is to give people internationally an opportunity for peer learning and exchange on the complexities and intricacies of education policy implementation processes and strategies. So this is based on a project that we have at the OECD called Implementing Education Policies, where we actually work to close the gap between the policy documents and ideas that are developed at the national level or regional level and actual education changes in the ground in schools for students. And so what we do is we work with individual countries, and we want to develop also an international knowledge on the topic of implementation, which is actually quite unique to each country. Today, we are presenting the Norway approach to school-based competence development with a focus on how decisions are made on school staff development priorities and funding. And this approach actually, importantly, aims to strengthen the partnerships between schools and education providers, actually, who are providing the training, and these are universities. We have been working with Norway for more than 2 years, actually, and it's been quite a pleasure to be working with Norway when the policy was in its inception and it was only a white paper. So we've been supporting its unfolding on the ground, working with education stakeholders, and really supporting the concrete ways that this policy has become a reality. And you will see this with the presentations from Andreas and Hege. So thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks, Beatrice. And yes, as Beatrice mentions, we're going to hear from Andreas. So Andreas, over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I want to first of all thank our Norwegian colleagues. Every time we review policies in a country, we learn so much from that country. And it's great to have a seminar like this today where we can give back to the international community some of the things that we have learned, people in Norway and around. What is very clear is that it's easy to design good policies. It's so much harder to put them into practice. Now, in a way, the road of educational reform is littered with many good ideas that were poorly implemented. That's really the hard part. So what keeps us awake at the OECD at night is really how to implement countries' ideas and policies in a way that they lead to actual change at the front line. And that's the test of truth for all we do. And we deploy a range of tools to this end, including comparative data and analysis. Then we engage with countries through policy assessment, building sort of good relationships over sustained periods of time. Beatrice just mentioned 2 years' time. That's the time it takes to really understand that context. And then also to hold strategic advice and implementation seminars. And that's, my colleagues, Beatrice, Pierre and Claire, that's what they have done in this case. And these days you can see the opposite too. These are difficult times for education in the pandemic. Now you see actually probably less education reform than in normal days, but more educational change at the front lines. And that's really at the heart of the project with Norway. Now, how can governments create an enabling environment so that change happens at the front line? That's the future of education. That's very much what the Norwegians have been trying to achieve. So we are now concluding 2 years of that collaboration to implement the competence development model for schools in Norway. It's been, again, a fantastic collaboration. And I want to say again, a mutual learning exercise also with the Norwegian reference group that I know has spent a lot of time and effort to help us understand the context. Now, you can always ask yourself, why would you change things when things go reasonably well? And I guess it's always the Norwegian question. But countries that are in difficulty will know that it's precisely this moment, when things actually are still very, very good, that this is the moment to think forward, to think towards the future. Now, there are clear challenges ahead. Educators' working environments are clearly increasingly challenging. Now, this is about diversity, this is about technology, this is about, health. Educators are engaging in developing a much broader range of knowledge, skills, attitudes, values. It's no longer just about cognitive learning. It's social and emotional development gets really to the front line. Very, very difficult to do in practice. And we also see that teachers across the OECD report that professional development based on a collaborative culture really is what drives impact for them. That's from our Thales survey. And this is something that you can see on the chart here, is where education systems still have shortcomings. Professional development is often still sort of the consumptions of new ideas, but not so much teachers engaging in becoming designers of innovative policies and practices. So that's what we've been looking to. When you look at sort of participation in professional development, Norway is sort of an average performer. You can see the blue dot for the OECD average being very similar to the Norwegian dot. A little bit less mentoring and induction in Norway than elsewhere, but broadly, the picture for Norway is like it is elsewhere in the world. What becomes more interesting is a quite clear gap in Norway between the share of teachers who said they learned something and the share of teachers who felt they're actually prepared for doing that something. And that implementation gap is, I think, something worth to look in more detail. Now, why is it that teachers often do not feel that they have, the agency, the enabling tools to do what they have learned? And you can look at this a little bit further when you actually look at collaboration, that our data show is so important. How frequently do Norwegian teachers engage in that? You can see the picture is quite mixed. Now, when it comes to discussing individual student results and team conferences, that's basically done by every teacher in Norway. But, when you get to the deeper forms of professional collaboration, now, you can see that's actually quite rare. no? Classroom observation, joint professional activities. No? And what our data show is that that kind of professional collaboration that is still quite rare in Norway is what actually drives outcomes. For example, when you look at teachers' sense of self-efficacy. Remember in the first chart I showed you teachers feeling they have learned something, but not really, you know, the sense of self-efficacy to do it. And you can see that is precisely a correlate of, you know, the regularly of teaching jointly as a team, observing other teachers' classes, engaging joint activities, and taking part in professional learning. Now you can see the same thing, that teachers' use of effective teaching practices, again, you know, highly predicted by the deeper professional collaboration. And interestingly, even job satisfaction. Now you can talk about salaries and working conditions and all of that, but actually the best predictor that we have for teachers' job satisfaction is this deep professional collaboration. And that's really sort of at the heart of all of this work. Now, so to respond to this, Norway created a decentralized model for competency development for schools. And that's a really, I think, a very innovative approach, focused on improving the quality of education by promoting professional collaboration. The model aims to provide freedom of action, professional autonomy, and empower at the same time systematic school improvement, and I emphasize systematic school improvement from the local level. That's the hard part. You know, how do you make bottom-up change systemic, predictable, reliable? Sort of about flipping the system from government steering that you can see in many education systems to really from leading from the local level through networks that deliver competence on a sustainable basis. So that's what we're going to talk about. And we look at this as always through the OECD lens. You know, whenever you engage with us at the OECD, you can see these three pillars is about the design of dynamic and self-sustainable policies. Now that's what we call SMART. It is about ownership by key stakeholders. Now, that's the only way how to get things done in practice. Now, if you do not engage people at the front line in the design of policies, they're not going to help you with implementing them. And then finally, do policies fit into the broader context, the social context, the cultural context, but also is it the right moment for the right thing? Now, those are the three lenses through which we are looking usually at things. And we did this as well. The heart of the model is to tailor teacher professional collaboration and development around local needs that can vary. And you can see how this works. You have in Norway, the cooperative forums at the regional level that, as you can see in the diagram, receive requests by municipalities on specific, development funding needs. And then in the forums and also together with universities, they then decide which courses or what professional development to organize and to provide funding for. Really, you can see really how sort of the systemic and the needs-based kind of elements come together, and you have county governors that then manage those funding requests. Now that's where sort of the crunch is. And in moving to action, Norway sharpened that project later. Not that the initial design was a little bit vague, but then in moving to the action phase, the objectives and coverage, where we find also the model was extended to cover special needs and early childhood education, two areas where teachers in Norway feel the greatest needs. It also involved a more consolidated policy approach. The municipalities get financial incentives for schools-based professional development. And there is also then a follow-up scheme for municipalities, which with performance indicators, very important, kind of creating a shared accountability for this. And then the county governors follow up. So that's basically the diagram. There's also a new legal framework now associated with funding of the model that involves 30% co-financing by the municipalities to give them a stake in all of that as well. But, for the model to work, we found a couple of issues still. It is still quite complicated. And people have said, is the decision-making as clear as it is in the processes? Is it clear enough what quality professional learning actually means, how to measure its impact? So those were questions that are still remaining. And this is where sort of the advice of the model of the work comes in. First of all, we thought it's important for schools, but also municipalities and universities to intensify their efforts in forging partnerships. Again, always easy to say, hard to find the space for this and to put it into action. But we also thought it was important to review the incentives and the follow-up mechanisms. And let me say what I mean by this. We suggested for the Norwegian Directorate to consider grants that are contingent on collaboration. So basically to give money for shared opportunities rather than for individual activities. You do something together and that collaboration gets its funding, and it brings and draws people together to think about resource utilization. So basically outstanding partnerships get rewarded by this. We also suggested for the directorate and the county governors to work on strengthening the system-wide evidence base. Now that's always important. How do you know what's actually having an impact? And to address some of the mechanical and sort of arbitrary cutoff issues that you always engage. Whenever you have indicators, you have to set ceilings, and they can always be debated. And the more clarity you can provide around this, the more predictable you can make that, the better it is. And then last but not least, in light of the new grants regulation, it's important for the Norwegian Director to follow up with county governors to ensure that there is no adverse effect of co-funding on participation. And that's always a risk, and municipalities and universities need to manage to agree on the funding distribution through the forum. So that's something just to watch out in practice. Now, on the stakeholder part, let's turn to the ownership question. We think that's actually always a strength in Norway, and we could see that very well. But we thought that in moving from the initial policy document to action, it was important that people are involved with the model, that those stakeholder relationships have sharpened, become clearer, and we can also see good steps towards building an accountability framework for all of this. Not one that is about top-down vertical relationships, but again, accountability through horizontal, lateral kind of collaboration. So that's happened between initial design and then they're putting this into action. Still, we think there are still a couple of issues to consider. For example, how can teachers and students be more involved in shaping the demand for professional development? Student voice also, students have a good picture actually what actually happens in classrooms. And we can seek their views in an intelligent ways, and that can then help teachers to reflect on where demand is. Second, what actually does quality mean in the model? And that means, how can one quantify, measure, observe it? And then how do you ensure consistency in communication when this work is so decentralized? You want to ensure fairness, consistency, peer learning in a decentralized model. That's actually a challenge. And those were the kind of issues that we have identified. But we have not left those issues without some advice on what could be done. So here are 3 recommendations on the second point. First, it's important to do more to engage pivotal stakeholders with the model. What is quite clear, what's clear to us, is that municipalities are primarily responsible, but there's also a good role for county governors and the Norwegian Director to assure and actively monitor that teachers and students' voices are actually heard, that they have a way to express themselves, and that somehow feeds into the model, into the articulation of the demand. That's something that we felt could still be done better. Second, it's important to foster transparency with clear quality indicators. We think that a good and coherent framework of quality dimensions and indicators that, again, it needs to be collaboratively developed. It's not something that is just, a scientific exercise. It's something for people to come up with metrics and ways of measurement. But we think if that is there, it could support monitoring and accountability, and actually at every level, at the municipality, at the county, and for the country as a whole. Measuring progress and impact always starts at the local level. I think that's also important. So it's key to provide validated instruments to counties, to municipalities, to schools that they can then use to foster quality, efficiency in their relative measurement practices. So basically having a good distribution of methods and tools. And then also, ultimately facilitate meaningful comparisons. That's how you learn from the next teacher, the next school, the next system, and the next provider. So to establish a comparative evidence base for peer learning. And then ownership and stakeholder engagement is always about effective communication. And that's the one thing that we learn from every study that we do, that you can never communicate too much. Mostly we communicate too little because we assume too many things that you cannot take for granted. We think it's worth strengthening the communication strategy with a narrative that speaks to all of the stakeholders, and particularly to the teachers and school leaders. They, are the driving force in all of this. And that communication involves good peer-to-peer elements to build the credibility and trust that actually any such approach really require. What could be done here is to establish a group of dedicated representative stakeholders that can then build and convey those messages on the model to support also its further development. So not easy to put into practice, but in our view, very, very important. Let me come to the third area. The strength of the model is really its whole of system perspective. It's very well sort of contextualized in the need, and particularly when the project moved from policy to action, it actually built also greater coherence with the broader policy context. It has sought to better coordinate by creating a county governors network, bringing those people together to sort of see the broader context and also to secure national coherence and adapt the work to national needs. It also involved aligning the approach to teacher professional development, obviously, and then also general policy alignment. I actually think for those countries other than Norway joining this call here, that's really something I would look for here. This is really well done in Norway to make sure that education policy is not in a silo, but is very closely connected to other areas. I think that's something that many countries could learn from this. But, for the model to become a fully systemic approach to professional development, we felt there are still a couple of questions to ask. Is this well aligned to the evaluation and assessment framework that Norway has? Professional development ultimately, should be leading to the kind of outcomes that then the assessment and evaluation framework tries to sort of see. Is that already the case? How much is this a priority among teachers' professional development activities? Is this really counting? And then is there capacity and leadership to effectively recognize needs and ensure provision? Good question to ask. And here are our recommendations on this. First, we think it's important to strengthen the coordination between the county governors and the directorate so that, the systemic approach becomes clearer. We suggest that the county governors network could help address the different capacity issues among municipalities. For example, finding synergies with other networks that already exist among the counties now. There is also a need to focus on the system-wide provision of professional development. Now, the directorate could assess whether the university network is the right platform for that, and how to include individual continuous professional development programs that are being provided by universities at different places. That's actually one way in which the county governors could play a role to help universities align their respective programs and maybe also learn from each other. And finally, we think there is guidance required on how the model activities articulates with the existing and also new policies. Now, for example, curriculum reform and how it also aligns with, again, the Norwegian evaluation and assessment activities and programs. So, and these things I think are not so difficult to address in practice. What is really best international practice is that the model was shaped by the stakeholders. It's a great example how you can actually have policy implementation owned at the front line and still achieve coherence and a systemic approach by getting people across the counties, the county governors, work together, you know, the collaboration fora, the role of municipalities, universities. I think they're all well keyed into this. I think it's great. And it's also a good example how to move systematically from policy design to action. As I said at the very beginning, that is actually quite rare for us to see at the OECD. We see lots of policy designs, policy initiatives, but I think this is a good example of actually translating ideas step by step into action and refining them. I think this is also a model that is learning while it's being implemented. And again, I think that's a very positive lessons. Couple of recommendations here. There is now a more coherent picture of the model and how to engage with this. It's still going to be important to first updating the strategy with the new components, and you know, when progress is made, to ensure that this remains a kind of dynamic, living document that adapts to changes in context and also according to the progress that is being made. So systematic intelligence gathering will be important at every layer of the system. How do we learn about the efficacy of those different practices? And then it's important to consolidate communication efforts to ensure that everybody has a voice, but that the narrative is coherent. And finally, what will be the longer term incentives and the actions? Now, once all of this is implemented, what is going to sustain this? What is it making systemic, and what makes, you know, good practice culture? Because culture is always, you know, what ultimately drives change. And to bring it all together, we've seen much progress with this, really innovative, and I would also say complex policy, you know, to support school improvement. It's not a kind of simple approach. It involved a lot of sort of ends, a lot of stakeholders, a lot of layers. So a lot of work actually gone into this. And we've, again, collaborated with Norway to move it from a white paper number 21, as I was told, into really actual policy on the ground. A very rewarding exercise also for us. We published a report with the recommendations that we are presenting here today. And I want to thank again all those involved in the work who were so engaged from Norway. That's another thing, you know, I take away from this, lots of people who really felt a deep commitment to make this work. And now we're going to hear from Hege Nielsen on how they have actually progressed with all of this and also what they plan for the future. Thank you again.
Thank you, Andreas. Yes, as Andreas said, we're now going to hear from Hege Nielsen, and from the Norwegian perspective. Hege, if you'd like to go ahead and share your screen and unmute.
Thank you. I will try to. There.
Yep,
we see my presentation.
We do. All good.
Yeah. Thank you, and thank you, Andreas, for presenting the advice from the OECD. Hello, everyone, and it's a great opportunity for Norway to present our approach to school improvement. I think just to start off with a quick view on the Norwegian system. As you know, we are quite a small country. We have 280,000 children in kindergartens, and that is actually 92% of all Norwegian children attend kindergartens. They belong to just below 6,000 kindergartens, half of which are private. 65,000 work in these institutions, just about 40% are kindergarten teachers. In primary and lower secondary, we have 640,000 pupils in 2,800 schools, only 4% of the pupils in private schools. We have 70,000 teachers, and the ratio of pupils per teacher is just below 16 pupils. In upper secondary, we have 190 pupils in 400 schools. 8% of the pupils attend private schools. And in upper secondary, we have a 50-50% of the pupils who attend general study programs and vocational training. And to understand the Norwegian model, you really need to understand the Norwegian system. And I think, as for many countries, we have a clear division of labor and roles in our system, with the Norwegian Parliament determines the national education policy, and the ministry shapes policies and delegates tasks to the directorate. And our mandate in the directorate is to ensure that all children, pupils, and adults receive equal education of a high quality. And the county governors, which Andreas talked a lot about, they are actually the national authorities on the regional level. So they are our right hand regionally, you might say. The local authorities carry out the policies, and they are responsible for kindergarten and schools in all our municipalities. We have in Norway, with 5 million inhabitants, 350 municipalities. So it goes without saying that many of these are small, and we also have 11 counties which are responsible for upper secondary. Working with quality development in a system like this with many small municipalities actually requires working in networks. So we have been working a lot on governance issues in Norway for the past 5-7 years, and many of our measures are carried out with a high emphasis on governance, working together, working in partnerships. And that is actually a reality for us if what we do on the national level actually makes a change in kindergartens and in classrooms. We do need to work closely with the actors that are actually responsible. We've had over a few years national strategies for professional development, and it has been an area which has been highly prioritized from the government. We spend a lot of money on professional development for teachers and kindergarten teachers, and we have for quite a long time working with further education for teachers, credit giving further education, which is individual, and on in-service professional development. And these have mainly accompanied a national strategy for reforms that are carried out in kindergartens and in schools. The responsibility for professional development is local. It's the school owner who has the responsibility to ensure that their schools meet quality standards and have qualified teachers. And recently, the formal competence requirement for teachers was strengthened, which means that we have teachers who by now do not meet formal requirements, and they have to take further education to meet these requirements before 2025. So this Competence for Quality program provides extensive support for this, but this is individual professional development. At the same time, we have spent a lot of money on in-service professional development, professional collaboration, as Andreas said, and many of these programs have been led by the Norwegian Directorate. Actually, the universities have been involved, but the Norwegian Directorate has had a strong role in these in-service professional development. So what we saw was that these in-service professional development schemes, they were quite successful, but they were steered by the national authorities. So we defined the scope and the visions for these programs, and the municipalities attended. So at some point we wanted to change how we looked at these programs, how we organized these programs, and we wanted to change the roles and to give the national authorities more of a coordinating initial role, and to actually give the power to the municipalities, to the local level, to themselves define what they need for professional development. So what we did was actually to take the money and the experience that we gained from all of the in-service training programs that we had and make a decentralized scheme with national funding. But we changed the decision making from the national level to the local school authorities to define and prioritize competence development needs in cooperation with universities. And with the decentralized Norwegian system, there was a need for coordinators to coordinate networks and cooperation, and that is the role by the county governors. What we wanted to achieve by this change was to make clear the responsibility on the local level to acknowledge their own needs for professional development, and we wanted to make sure that the universities actually did offer what the schools needed, and from the programs before this this decentralized scheme and this new model, what we learned from the in-service training programs was that it was really important to emphasize that it was a collaborative activity. So it was to engage the teacher profession at the school as a professional community, and that is that lesson is now a part of this decentralized scheme. So the professional development schemes offered by the universities, they have to build upon the thinking of a professional collaboration, not individual professional development. So the decentralized scheme is the main source of this new model, but we also have a follow-up scheme for municipalities that report weak results over time. They are offered state support and guidance from us. So the main principles is that the counties and municipalities have the main responsibility for quality development in schools, and that they shall have an extended scope of action. National strategies and incentives shall be differentiated, and that is one of the things we learned from all the national-led in-service programs, was that it was kind of one size fits all. So the flipping of the system that we are doing with this scheme is that the municipalities shall define their own needs and ask for the competence development in areas that they have defined that they need to develop. And the competence development shall be research and evidence-based, and it shall be provided by universities as collaborative programs. And as Andreas said, we have been working with our in-service professional programs for many, many years. And from 2017, a decentralized scheme for school follow-up programs. And we have been using previous experience from the national programs that were defined from the directorate to take into the changes that we have done in development and implementation of this model. So we also have a regional scheme for kindergartens. We also have a scheme for vocational training. And the last change input we have been making to this program is the in-service scheme for special needs and inclusive practices. So, and one part of developing this program and learn from previous experience what works and what doesn't is the new grant regulations, which clarifies aims, roles, and expectations for the in-service professional development model. I think we can say that we have moved from a situation where we had the national authorities providing a lot of in-service training programs to a situation where we have decentralized the decisions and the money to make the municipalities take their own decisions in what kind of competence development they actually need in which areas. And the aim is to enable unified practices across the country, involvement and local ownership to the model. And the new, as I said, is in-service professional development scheme for special needs and inclusive practices is included in the model. And what we have done there is also include professional workers outside of the schools to join in the professional collaboration schemes. So Andreas has talked a lot about main advice from the OECD team, so I will skip this and talk a little bit about what we have achieved. And working so many years with the constantly refining the model and make it clearer about roles and responsibilities, I think the model is now well rooted and understood both by the school sector and university partners. And the development and the refinement that we have done has always been done in close cooperation with all the actors. So it's been a lot of discussions on how to move forward, what kind of changes that would actually benefit this model. The new grant regulations are well received and it contributes to clarity. We have designed new web pages, and that is also, of course, a response to the communication action from the OECD team. And we've had good dialogue with all the main actors and stakeholders, both at a regional and national level. And the implementation of the model is followed by a research-based program. That is actually quite common in Norway. When we introduce reforms in Norway, they are almost every time followed by a research-based program. And by that, we can refine and evolve the different measures that are provided from national authorities. So our experience from this OECD cooperation is that it has been great to cooperate with a highly competent OECD team. We have used the OECD team as critical friends, and they have raised important discussions, and they have contributed to taking the refinement of the model forward. The process has helped us to identify main challenges at every level. And I think the interaction between the OECD team and the stakeholders have been quite useful. What we experienced is that our dialogue and conversation with stakeholders, it was kind of more open when the OECD team was present. So we had good conversations on these events. So we have learned that it's important to clarify roles and expectations on both sides, both on the OECD and the directorate, and that we have a joint understanding on what we aim to achieve, what kind of targets we would like to achieve, and also a joint understanding of context. Every system has its own specificities, and the Norwegian system, although we are a small country, it's quite complex, highly decentralized, many actors, and also a variety throughout the country that requires different kind of measures, and certainly one size doesn't fit all in our country. So that is the main reason why we emphasize the importance of thinking carefully about governance, partnership, cooperation, and openness and inclusion of all key partners. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hege. Now we're going to move on to some questions, and I can already tell you that there are a lot of questions that have come in. So quick reminder to anyone who wants to add more, you can use the chat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read them out to our panelists, but I will say that there are a lot of them. So if we don't get around to your question, I apologize in advance. We've only got about 15 minutes to address these. So let's go. We have a question here that says, there are some that are more concrete. So Hege, are the county governors connected to / employed by the directorate, or political positions, are our political positions connected to the government of the municipalities? That question came from Anna Corinne, and I think that's for Hege.
Thank you. The county governors, they are the national authorities at the regional level. We have 10 county governors now, and they are a bureaucratic constellation as the directorate, no politicians there. And they actually have in their task, they deal with a lot more than education. So they kind of have a whole approach to the municipalities with all the areas that the municipalities are responsible for. And they carry out both inspection and support and guidance within education. So they are kind of our right hand and closer to the municipalities. And the municipalities, they are democratic institutions led by politicians.
Thank you. So this next question comes from Graham. And what I'll do, I think I'll give this to Hege, but then other colleagues on the Zoom, please do, after Hege is finished, let us know if you have anything to add. So Graham asks, well, he says that the key resource in translating policy into reality is time. How has Norway created the space for collaboration? Do teachers' contracts embed time for development and collaboration?
Well, I agree, and it's quite difficult. We do have quite a lot of governance discussions in Norway because we have used this way of working in a lot of processes, especially the process with developing our new curriculum. And it really takes time and effort, not only on the national level, but also on the local level and from all the actors. So I think you have to decide initially that you actually will work this way. And it takes time and efforts, and you have to agree with all the partners that this is the way that you want to work. I think that as a result of working like this in more and more processes, we actually need to decide how many things we can do at once, not only on the national level, but also on the local level. And as for time to professional development, I'm not sure if I am the right person to, there are some time for professional development within the frames, but we actually in the funding system, both in the further education and in this professional collaboration, there are funding mechanisms who ensures that the schools and the teachers do have time to attend these programs.
Thank you. I can see Anne-Berit has very politely raised the hand, and also Beatrice too, but we'll go to Anne-Berit first, and then maybe Beatrice can say a few words.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to emphasize that what Hege said finally, that teachers do have joint time for professional development. So that is part of their contract as teachers. And also I can say that in the new regulations for this grant scheme, we have also enabled the municipalities to set aside the time for a coordinator for this professional development, which will help, especially when there are many parties joining the professional development that they are going into.
So I just wanted to thank, there's so many questions about the model, we're actually overwhelmed. I think one of the issues to clarify, or that to give you some further detail, is the way the model works for actual schools. And what happens is, after the negotiation of what the school needs are, they engage with universities, and universities, the aim is actually for universities to develop tailor-made professional development. So not to give them this course that they already have, that teachers will go to, but a university who is very embedded in their own traditional ways have to change the way they deliver professional development in a way that is much more 21st century oriented. And so through these negotiations, universities will maybe send one of their professors to the school and work with the school for a week on supporting the professional development of all the teachers in the school, or they will adapt to the needs of the schools of the local level. So it's very particular, and there's no one way that this training is really delivered, but it's actually in the negotiation process that this is shaped. So that's at the heart of the model, and it's very unique because each region, each municipality gets their own approach to professional development based on this bargaining process. And in this process of discussion, of collaboration, all the different stakeholders participate, including unions at the different levels and other stakeholders. We have actually prepared 2 reports for Norway because we started working with Norway in 2018, and when the model was starting, and there is a description in the report, in the first report, of the roles and responsibilities of different players in the system. And then we did a second report at the end of last year, and it describes again roles and responsibilities, and it provides links and detailed descriptions in English of what the policy looks like, and our advice as well. And there's also, and Berit and Hege have sent us a link to their new website, which describes the model, but it's all in Norwegian. So I've translated through Google Translate, so you can see the model, but it's difficult. And they now have a whole regulation that was just approved a month ago, or very early on in January, I think, that describes the model and how you request for funding and all the particular processes that are necessary to engage with the model. Just to provide a general overview. Thank you.
Andreas, I can see you had a hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, just on that question from Graham, obviously time is a prerequisite for collaboration to happen, but time is far from sufficient. In fact, I think Norway is just the case in point. And by the way, so is Finland. Both countries are quite generous in the time that teachers have for other things in teaching. And as you could see, collaboration is not yet the kind of strengths that you'd want to have. And so I think, time, yeah, necessary, but not sufficient. The big issue is really work organization. And that's really what this reform is about, to get universities into a place where they actually listen to what teachers need in their schools, in their context, and to build a professional development around them. I think really it's work organization and culture that come first, and then the time, you need to free up, obviously, as well.
I agree. I think these are really important points because we have changed our in-service training from thinking about it as one-to-one courses where the teachers visit the universities, to a situation where it's professional collaboration and the universities actually comes to the schools and the kindergartens. So it's a really change. And to make that change, it has been necessary to also fund the universities into making that change, because their normal way of operating is actual individual courses.
Because of the very large amount of questions, I'm going to make an effort to kind of try and group a few. So Pedro and Moira were asking about teachers' attitudes. How were teachers' attitudes taken into account when making this strategy? And the same kind of in the same vein, what would you do about if teachers then suddenly disengaged and were not really connecting with the strategy or implementing it? I think maybe that can go to Hege first, and then if the OECD maybe wants to comment in general about how we would combat that.
Well, we actually have required a framework around how we work with professional development that is quite inclusive to all the stakeholders. So we have discussions with all the stakeholders on how we refine and further develop the model. And when we changed our in-service training from a more individualistic view to a more professional collaboration view, it was very welcomed. And we also had some themes that actually reached the teachers with assessment for learning, reading, numeracy, and it was really useful, and the teacher actually really liked that way of working, because then you work with your colleagues. It is aligned in a way that you actually you come together, you learn something new, and then you actually have to try it out until the next time you meet, and then you share experiences and views on how you actually refined your own teaching, how you collaborated with your colleagues, and so on. So this change has actually been very welcomed by the teachers.
Beatrice, you have a hand up.
Yes, I think there's so many questions again about the engagement of teachers and school leaders on this model, and how they get their needs met. And this was one of the issues that we didn't find clarity on, and at the early stages of the model, and we kept insisting, well, you know, this seems like there's a lot of negotiations at the middle level, but how do you really get the needs of teachers met? How do you get the recognition of what they need? Where is this coming through? And this is something we've insisted in our recommendations. Please invest more time in getting the real needs of teachers up to the model, because otherwise it won't work. And so there's been efforts, I think, by Norway to really see how to best integrate. And still, we think it's important for you to bring them much more to the discussion processes, because unless teachers are well aware of this model, they understand that it is for them, it will really not reach its final objective. And I think that involves you working with the teacher unions, with other organizations that represent teachers and that are providing professional development to make sure that this happens at the local level. And I think in the implementation process, you have been, you know, slowly engaging them and finding new ways. So it's been a fine-tuning process of the whole model developing. And what happened is that initially it was only for, there's individual professional development for teachers who can get their own competency and accreditations, and then collaborative professional development for schools. So these are quite complementary, and it is this model targets the collaborative professional development, and it's working well, but there is still, and one of the questions talks about what are the metrics to know that the model is working. And it is still very difficult to understand that at the end, how will you understand that this is improving the system, that teachers are being involved, that it is actually having impact in the way they practice in schools. And this is something that there is a need for a much more clear understanding of what is teacher quality in Norway and how you will measure progress towards that. And I think that's still in the making across Norway by discussions with stakeholders across the country.
I think we have time for just one more question, and I'm again going to try and group them. So Alberto and also Smada are also asking about how do you manage the different, well, how different regions can be, you know, with this model of more decentralization. And also Smada has introduced into that, what about local politics? How's that overcome?
Yeah, and if I start, I think we have to acknowledge that this kind of change that we have done in Norway, that is not an easy change seen from a political point of view, because our earlier practices, our national politics, we could steer professional development into certain themes and topics that we were interested in, that the schools developed. And now the decisions are local, and it's the local needs that should fund the decisions on professional development. But what we see so far is that when we do this at the same time as we introduce a new curriculum, and we've had main goals for developing the schools in Norway that has been sustainable for maybe 10, 15 years. So the local municipalities, they tend to take really seriously the national goals for education. So we see that the popular themes and topics for the decentralized model, they really align with national goals. So in some way, I think we have a shared view in which kind of direction we want to steer the professional development. But of course, there is a risk that the local authorities prioritize something that we wouldn't agree on at the national level. But that is a part of the model, and that is the freedom that they actually have locally.
So I think we've just about run out of time for questions. I'm really sorry to everybody who put questions in. We had so many, but that's so fantastic. I only wish we had more time to answer them. Before closing though, Andreas, I wondered if you had any kind of final words to, you know, sum up the experience here and the experience of Norway in this area. Oh, you're still on mute, sorry.
I just want to say this has been a fantastic collaboration between the Norwegian authorities at every level of the system, including teachers and universities and the OECD. We've learned a lot, and I do believe the world can learn a lot from this. This is really about, you know, when we talked about disengagement before, this is about, you know, listening to the voice of teachers. Where is the demand, and then tailoring provision around those needs. And I think it's been done in a way that it's becoming systemic, and that's, I think, where the world should be going.
Thank you, Andreas. And yes, thank you to everybody for joining. We had over 1,000 people registered for this, over 500 were watching, and, you know, far more questions that we could answer in an hour. But yes, thanks again for joining, and thank you to Hege, to Amber-Britt and Andreas and the OECD colleagues for giving us the overview. If you'd like to learn more, this is for the audience, if you'd like to learn more about the report, you can find it on the OECD iLibrary. We put the links in the chats during the webinar. And if you would like to keep up with our latest work in general, I invite you to have a look at our Twitter page, which is @OECD Edu Skills. And that's where you'll really find all the latest on everything we're doing in education. So thanks again, everybody, and until the next webinar.